I met Dr. Stillwagon at the Freedom Law School rally. It was the Let's Go Brandon rally in Florida. And he gave a great talk about immunity and the whole issue of what's going on with the vaccine and COVID. But what I really got interested talking to him was about the issue of pilot safety. So Dr. Stillwagon, you there? We can get you on
Yes,
here.
I'm here. I'm
All
anxious
righty.
to talk about this subject today.
Yeah, now you were a Delta pilot for decades, right? Long time?
Yes, I've been an airline pilot for 33 years, 26 years with Delta Airlines, and 21 years of that as a captain with Delta Airlines. And I was forced to retire because I drew my line in the sand very early. For me, it was the issue of wearing a mask as part of my uniform. And I had a serious conversation with my superiors, my chief pilots, about that. I gave them all the medical reasons why a pilot should definitely not be wearing a mask and how it can create hypoxia and difficulty in concentration, things of that nature. And putting a mask on a passenger would even be worse, because the cabin altitude of an aircraft, generally flying coast to coast, is going to be anywhere from 7,000 to 8,000 feet, which is like being on top of a high mountain. And it's just not a good idea to, put people into a hypoxic condition. And some of these people may already be hypoxic. They may have, medical conditions that would preclude them from wearing a mask, and they're just telling everybody you have to wear a mask. And so for me, giving them the medical reasons of why this was not a good idea, they said, yeah, we understand that. We know that the mask does not prevent the transmission of a viral illness, but our corporation wants us to wear it as optics because we feel that our passengers would be more comfortable if they saw all of our crew members wearing a mask. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that. And they said, well, then you can't work here anymore. And then I said, all right, well, I know you have an early retirement program coming up, so I'll take that, and that'll be the end of it. So I drew my line in the sand very early.
It's so sad that they actually admit it doesn't do anything to stop the transmission of viruses or whatever.
That's right.
And and I can tell you, I spent 45 years of my life in a mask, and I'm doing long spine surgeries. And I will tell you that I never had a problem feeling short of breath or but I do on an airplane. That I can still run up and down hills, not a problem, but I feel not comfortable. And they say it's not so much I had a friend tested this, by the way, and said that it's the CO2 buildup. That testing behind masks, she got up to 10,000 parts per million, whereas OSHA says only 2,000 parts per million at the max,
Right.
And that's only for short periods of time. So it's a safety, even forgetting the comfort of the pilots. What I really am interested in talking to you about, and we've talked a little bit before, but now we've had this pilot have a cardiac arrest 6 minutes after landing. So there's a couple
Right.
issues here. There's the masks and there's the vaccines. And
Yeah.
all of this violates basic airline, and I know from hanging out in the military with pilots and flight surgeons, it violates basic flight surgeon training and safety for military pilots. So how safe are we in the air these days? I don't like to fly to begin with. This isn't helping me.
I'm telling you right now, every pilot that got this shot and is having an adverse reaction that they may not even be able to feel. It could be asymptomatic. They could have microclotting going on, and they may not even realize it. Literally, these men and women are ticking time bombs. And we just saw that with Captain Robert Snow. He was the captain of an Airbus. It's a 200-passenger aircraft. That's the aircraft that I retired off at Delta Airlines. It's a very complicated aircraft. It's a fly-by-wire aircraft. There are no direct connections or cables between any of the flight controls and any of the surfaces that actually control the trajectory of the aircraft through the air. It uses a side stick controller, much like operating a computer game or flying, a tabletop flight simulator, and many people have done that. That's literally like flying what flying one of these jets is like. So the problem is the other pilot cannot see the control inputs that the other pilot is putting into the aircraft, nor can this other pilot feel it, because only one flight control moves. The other one is always
Wow.
stationary. Now, with a normal aircraft, it's not like that because you have a yoke in front of you that's connected to cables, which go out to flight control surfaces, and you can actually see the control inputs that that pilot is putting into the aircraft. So the problem with a fly-by-wire aircraft is the one pilot could be putting in a flight control uh, movement that the other pilot cannot see. Now they can actually detect what it is by seeing what the aircraft response will be. But now since it's a fly-by-wire aircraft, the other pilot can put in an opposite control movement. And all this does is what's called blending. It will actually blend the flight control movements or the flight control inputs from each side stick. So if the captain puts in a full left control to bank the aircraft full left, and the co-pilot says, well, we shouldn't be doing that. We need to go to the right. So the co-pilot puts in an input to move the aircraft to bank right. Those control inputs are going to be blended and cancel each other out. But
Oh my
there's a
gosh.
safety mechanism built in. There's a little red button that's on the side stick, and the one pilot that wants to maintain control of the aircraft and have total control has to push that button in and continue to hold it in. And now they will have complete control of the aircraft. Now, here's the problem. If Captain Snow would have had this cardiac incident, which caused him to lose consciousness, and he had a spasm in his arm muscles or hand muscles that caused him to move that control stick either forward or to the left or either direction or even backwards, and the other pilot did not want that movement to happen. That other pilot has a certain amount of time where they have to press and hold that cancel button so that they can now maintain total control of that aircraft. So there's a certain amount of time that this takes. And if this happens close to the ground, it could be a disaster. We could lose control of an aircraft, and many people are going to be injured or even killed. Another problem that could happen is an input into the rudder pedals. These are the pedals that the pilot is working with his or her feet as they're landing the aircraft. Now, these are connected to each other, so the one pilot can feel the input that the other pilot is putting in through the rudder pedals. However, if a pilot would have a spastic cardiac event or some neurological event that would cause one of their legs to extend fully forward and lock that rudder pedal into that position, the other pilot may not have the strength to overcome that, and this could also be a disaster. So we've got pilots flying around now with what's called microclotting that's happening in their bloodstream. This is a direct result of getting one of these so-called vaccines, and they're having myocarditis and pericarditis also. Now, being a pilot, it's the best career in the world. I'm telling you, being a major airline pilot is like somebody who likes baseball making it to Major League Baseball. Millions of people have pilot's license, but only a select few get to make it to a major airline career. It's a very coveted position, and these pilots, men and women, are highly trained, and they're trusted by their company to operate a completely safe flight. And it's up to the pilot to determine whether he or she is up to the task of being in command of an aircraft with several hundred people behind them. So here's the problem. If a pilot is experiencing some minor chest pains, if he or she comes forward and mentions this to the aeromedical examiner, it's going to put them under a microscope and literally put their career at risk. I know
Really?
this is happening to some of these pilots. Unfortunately, they're not coming forward and saying anything because they know that it could absolutely ruin their career. They might think that it's maybe just a gastric problem, maybe some heartburn, uh, maybe something they ate. They're going to
Yeah, so
explain it off.
there's an incentive to not necessarily, take things seriously. You try and just write them off, even though these are and in all fairness, these are the healthiest people in the world. I mean, these people have been screened like crazy, and
Yeah.
are afraid of, as I always say, are afraid of sneezing in front of their flight surgeon. I mean, these guys, but they're not going to be open about this. Which is
No,
now,
they're
do you have a sense though of how much, like, in the current, people have to get yearly physicals, right? And they have to get EKGs. And do you have a sense of what the percentage of pilots are that are being picked up for having problems, EKG problems, or something changing?
there there is there are a few pilots that are having irregularities that are showing up on their EKGs right now. But here's the problem. The real issue is myocarditis, and many
Right,
times that will not show up on an EKG unless you're
right.
wearing the EKG for an extended period of time. So here's what's got to happen, and this is for the safety of the flying public. Every pilot that got this injection that they're calling a vaccine, I don't care how old they are, every pilot needs to have
Okay.
a complete cardiac screening done on them. This would include not only an EKG, but a cardiac MRI. You also have to check for D-dimer levels, which
Yes.
would indicate microclotting is
Simple.
happening. Also, troponin levels, which would indicate that they've had some heart damage. There's also some other inflammatory indicators that can be used, like a PULS test, PULS test. Now, all of these tests are very expensive. So, the very companies that coerce these pilots into getting these shots are going to have to pay for this. And any pilot that is going to show, high levels of these things and indications of myocarditis, they're going to have to be grounded and put on some kind of a treatment regimen until that they can prove that they're healthy and safe enough to fly again. Or we're headed for a disaster. I'm telling you right now. The chances of both pilots having a heart attack at the same time or losing consciousness in the cockpit at the same time are extremely remote. But I think we might be headed for a situation where both pilots could become incapacitated at the same time. In other words, they'll experience some kind of an event that's going to affect them either physically or mentally, that's going to require putting the aircraft on the ground as quickly as possible for the safety of the
Right.
flight. Now, listen,
Well, and
I've been a captain for a long time, and having incapacitation of your other pilot is a really big deal. And we're trained for that. We really are. But you're putting the entire flight onto one pilot now, which is a huge responsibility. You've got to change the direction of the aircraft. You have to change the destination. You have to refile a flight plan. You have to you know, re
so
reprogram the flight
would you
computers. It's a
continue a flight? Normally, would you, if a co-pilot became incapacitated, would you continue the flight, or would you bail out to the nearest airport,
normally
kind of thing?
normally if you're close enough to your destination, you will continue the flight. But if you're on a longer flight and you're over a major city that can handle a diversion of the particular aircraft you're flying, then yes, you will divert the flight.
Okay.
And this is normally done with cooperation with the medical team at the particular airline and also the dispatch service. And you'll contact them by radio and declare a medical emergency. And as a team together, you will decide, what you're going to do. You'll either continue to the destination or you'll put the aircraft on the ground immediately.
Now, the other question I'm curious about, which we never hear, is what's happening to passengers at altitude, because we know that just being on a plane, especially long flights, gives you an increased risk of clotting, thromboembolic events. But we
It
never
does.
are hearing that that's gone up in this situation. But I have to believe it is.
I think that it is, and I can talk about that from personal experience. I stuck around long enough after they started forcing the masks onto passengers. And I did have one incident where a passenger stood up to go use the lavatory and passed out in the aisle and hit their head on an armrest on the way down. There was no severe injury, but the passenger did lose consciousness. I'm sure it's happened to other pilots. I'm sure if you interviewed other pilots or flight attendants that they could probably tell you that this has happened on an increasing incidence after the masking. Now, you've
And
been
is
on
that
an
a
air. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, is that a reportable event? Is that something that normally, forgetting COVID for a minute and the shots, in the old days, would that have been reported on some manifest or something that could be tallied?
Yeah, we're required to fill out an incident form. The flight attendants will fill that out,
Okay.
particularly if the passenger has lost consciousness. Yeah, it has to go into the records. And of course, the oxygen bottle is going to be used on the aircraft, and that's going to have to be replaced. So there has to be a reason why did you use the oxygen bottle. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a paper trail. This can all be tracked.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we should be that they somebody knows this data. We just don't know this data.
Yeah, somebody knows what's going on, that's for sure. We're just not going to be able to see it for, quite a number of months or years until somebody does a FOIA request or just demands
Right.
that the airlines come forward with, exactly what is going on with your passengers at altitude from forcing them to be wearing these masks.
Well, and
But
then the
that's
other
not,
issue, yeah, the
go
other
ahead.
issue we should be able to figure out, maybe we don't have pilots coming forward necessarily or the public knowing through news, but is there a shortage right now of pilots being able, I mean, are they going to call you back, do you think? Is
Well,
there a manifest shortage of pilots right now? Are enough dropping out because of these medical problems?
I think that there is a shortage of pilots right now. You won't really see it for a few months, probably until we get into the summertime. And the reason is because the scheduling for pilots is very flexible. A pilot can work as hard as he or she wants to, or as little as he or she wants to. So normally, when there's a pilot shortage, the company will put out incentives for a pilot to come and fly on their days off, and this would be an increase in their pay rate. So yeah, the companies, the airlines, they have a way to
Okay.
cover these pilot shortages, but eventually it's going to reach a point where the pilots are going to be flown as hard as they can. There are a certain amount of hour limitations. Uh, FAA rules that you can only fly so much, and once those limits are hit, then yeah, you'll start to see flight cancellations happen.
Yeah, I think,
So
go ahead.
if pilots get grounded, if this really gets to the point where pilots are going to have to be called in, and have a medical exam, and we have to have one every 6 months anyway. But if they're going to become more rigorous now because of this myocarditis and pericarditis issue, yeah, we're going to see an absolute, pinch on air travel. You'll see it for sure.
Well, and one of the big feeds to the airlines is the military, and then those pilots all got vaccinated, or most of them, which is
Yeah,
unbelievable because it
yeah,
violates
let's
the
just
basic principles.
here's how the FAA works. Either they do something on what's called a preventive basis or it's reactionary. Unfortunately, most of it is reactionary. When something really, really bad happens, like you'll remember this back in the 1970s, there was an L-1011 going into the Dallas airport that hit wind shear, and the aircraft crashed on short final, and I believe everybody on the airplane died. It was a terrible, terrible, tragic event. So the reaction to that from the FAA was, well, we need to have predictive wind shear equipment on the ground at all airports and also on all aircraft. So that was done. And now, decades later, you rarely see a wind shear event with an aircraft, and there hasn't been any deaths because we can actually detect wind shear now, and we direct aircraft away from those problems. Now, a preventive measure would be like what happened when they extended the pilot's retirement age from 60 to 65. And this occurred several years back. And what they said was, well, we can't really put two pilots together over the age of 60 in the cockpit in command of an aircraft because we don't have any safety data on that. So for 7 years, they prohibited pairing two pilots over the age of 60 together at the same time. And once they gather enough data to see that, yeah, it's okay to have pilots fly up until the age of 65, there's no safety signals that are happening here, then they drop that regulation, and now two old guys or two old ladies can fly an aircraft now up until the age of 65.
Well,
But
we
what
won't
did they
use the
do with
term
the
old
shot?
for that.
Well, yeah,
We
I
won't use
would
the term
gladly.
old for between 60 and 65, but yeah.
Yeah, listen, you want the old salts like me in the air. I mean, I've been an
I
airline
want some
captain for
experience.
21 years. Yeah, exactly. That's what you want. You want these people back in the cockpit. This could happen if we get into an absolute crunch where there's not enough pilots to fly aircraft. Yeah, they're just going to have to drop the mandatory retirement of 65. And as long as a pilot can continue to pass those every 6 months physicals and those every 9 months simulator checks to make sure that you can handle any and all emergencies, yeah, they'll let pilots fly until they don't want to fly anymore. As simple as that. But the point I was trying to make is they took 7 years to gather data for people
Oh, I
over the
see.
age of 60. And what did they do with the shot? Okay, 2 days.
Right.
2 days is all they waited. This is ridiculous. There was no safety data collected. We're collecting the safety data now, right? We're still in the safety trial. These are all experimental products. None of them have ever been fully FDA approved until August the 23rd of 2021. And the first one to get approval was the Pfizer shot, and they called that Comirnaty. But the problem is you can't get that shot,
Yeah, that
not in
doesn't
the
exist
United
really.
States. It does not exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is because any FDA approved product would now have liability placed back on the vaccine manufacturer, unless that vaccine is what's on the childhood vaccine schedule. And that's what's
Well, and
happening now.
also that's true. Also, though,
They're
it's
trying to get it
transparency. They have to tell us what's in an approved drug. They don't have to
right.
tell us what's in this. And so here we are having pilots fly around in the air of major jumbo jets, and we don't
Right.
know what we injected into them. That's really true. That's a sad but simple way to look at this.
Now they did publish what is in Comirnaty,
Right,
and
but
you
that's
can
not what
actually.
anybody got.
That's true. That's
They
true, and
did
they
not
admitted.
publish, and they will not publish any EUA. So the military, you know, this is crazy. Our military, our first responders, and our airline pilots, all the people you need to kind of keep things under control in a crisis, were injected with an unknown substance whose genomic sequence was theoretically given to us by the People's Liberation Army country of China. Let's just
It
think
was.
about that.
It
And I
absolutely.
mean, it's crazy. Yeah, they uploaded a genome from one patient that had no testing or autopsy, of course, and we took that and created these so-called vaccines that are not vaccines and gave it to all our pilots and first responders. It's
Yeah. Now
incredibly crazy.
I I got to interrupt you for just a second. What they did in the military is absolutely criminal because the
Yeah,
military regulations clearly say that you cannot inject anything into our troops unless it is an approved product.
proved.
So,
Can't
what did they
experiment on.
do? They took the Comirnaty label and they put it on these vials that did not contain Comirnaty and put it into our troops. That's
Now, I didn't
criminal.
know they had changed the label, but I know they told them it was approved. They told them that I talked to military guys that said we were told it was approved. Well, the thing that was approved was not what they got. And I do know
That's
some,
right.
yeah, some
But they
flight
put the
surgeons and
label on it.
right,
They
right.
put the
It's
label on
unbelievable. I didn't know they
this.
relabeled it. That's even more criminal. That's
It's
unbelievably
absolutely,
criminal.
somebody has got to go to prison over this. I am so furious over what's happened with this whole situation. I just can't even describe how furious I am that the FAA would do something like this. Now, I talked to Captain Bob Snow in person. He is absolutely furious. He was
Yeah,
coerced in getting, his chief pilot told him, "You either get this shot or you're fired."
right.
Now, listen, who knows what these pilots have in their personal lives as far as financial obligations.
Right.
I mean, giving up a career like that, that's a huge thing. Now, for me, I was able to walk away because I was close to retirement
Me
anyway,
too.
and I've been very fortunate with how I've invested, and I'm fine. I could afford to walk away from my job. Many people can't do that, and that's where they got you. That's called coercion. You can't
Yeah.
have that, especially with an experimental product. That's totally illegal. You can't do
You
that to
know,
people.
and I wrote an article. In fact, I wrote 2 articles in 2015, then everybody thought I was crazy. But it was, which I might be, but not about this. I wrote 2 articles, and it was in WorldNet Daily, and one of them was they are planning on mandating vaccines for adults. And everybody said, "Oh, well, that's not going to happen." And then the other
Right.
thing, my other article was vaccine mandates will bring on a totalitarian nightmare. I think
Yeah,
I'm I think I'm pretty close on that one too. That was
we are.
2015.
Yeah, we're headed that direction. You know, the WHO right now is signing treaties with 194 countries, and the United States is one of them. And they're signing this treaty to determine with lockstep compliance what the next pandemic response will be. And it definitely involves a digital vaccine passport.
Yeah,
That is
definitely.
slavery right there. And it's worse
Right.
than a virus ever could be. So we should pull out of the WHO immediately. And it's not
Yeah.
going to affect the WHO because Bill Gates will fund it, just like he did the last time we pulled out. We pulled out
Yeah,
of the
I'd just like to kick him
WHO.
out of my state and have him not buy up farmland. And
Oh,
I
yeah,
I think the only way we stop this is states' rights. The states are going to have to exert their rights in saying we are not going to do it, and the
right.
sheriffs are going to have to exert their rights because now in the this is a little off our topic, which we'll get back to after the break about flying, but they're coming after our food supply now. And in
Yes,
the
I.
Midwest, they claim there's avian flu breaking out, and they're destroying all the chicken farms. Now, first of all, there's no evidence that avian flu infects humans. That's just a name they gave it, so it sounded like it would, but it hasn't been proven. And the second thing that we get anything from chickens, yes, we get salmonella. That's a whole different issue, not an
Yeah.
airborne virus. But the other thing is, how did they determine the chickens are having avian flu? A PCR test,
Oh
just
God.
like the ones that lied to us. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't get me going on the PC test. That thing is just ridiculous.
Right. And so, that's we're forcing the vaccine on people though for a disease we don't completely understand with testing that's fallacious and no real scientific systematic autopsies. And given to us by the Chinese. Other than that, what could go wrong?
Yeah, a lot can go wrong. And the whole testing concept is ridiculous, Dr. Merritt, and you know this. The
Yeah.
only way to know if a person is infected by a virus is to find that virus in their blood or their lymphatic system, not in their snot and their spit. We have to stop testing mucus. We breathe
Yeah.
100 million various viruses every single day, whether you're wearing a mask or not. They get stuck in your mucus naturally. So if you look for them there, you will find them there. It doesn't mean that you're going to get sick or even are sick. It just means that
And
there's
even
viral material present there. We need to
and
stop it.
even
And this
worse
is,
than viruses. We have bacteria that we find in those
oh, of
masks that the
course,
children went to school. I mean, they
right.
cultured them. They had tuberculosis and meningitis and
Yeah.
staph and strep and all these different organisms. I mean, I really was surprised to find that they came
So,
back with TB. That was
yeah. So
that even surprised me.
this
But that's
should
what we
be
live
a
with all the time,
I know this should be a clue to everyone now that the
right?
presence of a virus or a bacteria does not necessarily equate with symptoms. It's not the cause. There is an association there with viruses and bacteria for sure, but ultimately the cause of the illness is a depressed or an overreactive immune system. And that's what this shot does. This shot depletes your immune system. It doesn't it doesn't make it stronger, it makes it weaker.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
How do you?
we're going about this thing the whole wrong direction. I actually had a meeting last night with Dr. Peter McCullough was there. Dr. Ryan Cole was there. Also, Dr. Carrie Madej. A great meeting. And I was talking to Dr. Peter McCullough, and I said, "You just wrote a brilliant article with Dr. Stephanie Seneff talking about innate immunity." And that is truly where the protection of infection resides, is in your innate immune system. And it does not involve antibodies. It doesn't
Right.
involve antibodies at all. So what does Fauci want everybody to do? He wants everybody to bypass that innate immune system that protects you from being infected and inject something inside of you directly into your bloodstream that creates antibodies. And the antibodies are only there to react to a subsequent infection. They will never, ever prevent you from an infection. And all shots we call vaccines are like that. All of them. They do not prevent infection. They're there as a backup. So the presence of antibodies is actually is an indication that your innate immune system has failed you. But it's even worse than that now, because this mRNA shot that they're putting into people and trying to create antibodies is actually directly destroying the innate immune system. And we know this
Yeah.
because scientists and pathologists like Dr. Ryan Cole have counted the numbers of natural killer cells, dendritic cells, and activated T cells. Those are the three cells of your innate immune system. They have counted these cells before and after the shot. And clearly we can see that the numbers of these cells have been reduced. This is a bad
Yeah.
thing, and it's definitely going to affect the health of our nation. It's not going to be a
Right.
good thing.
So we're just talking about heart attacks and blood clotting and things in the pilots, but we're not out of the woods for cancer, and
No,
including brain cancer that comes on in rapid. We've seen that in the military. We've seen rapid onset cancers of the brain and of other parts, but I'm specifically talking about the brain when you're talking about pilots using judgment. There are other issues here because it does damage your innate immunity, and that's why we're seeing all these things come out. We always have genetic codes for cancer in our system, but we keep it under check
right.
with our innate immunity. And so
We
we're
do.
seeing cancer come out and all sorts of other viruses, or at least other exanthems like shingles and things come out.
And there's two reasons for that. Number one, your innate immune cells have specialized sensors on them called toll-like receptors that can actually look inside of cells and determine their health. And that's how natural killer cells will determine if you have cancer cells. Most of us have cancer cells every day, and our natural killer cells are just destroying them. So you're taking the ability of that away from these innate immune cells. But not only that, it's been shown that the injection depresses what's called DNA methylation. And DNA
Yeah.
methylation is what actually keeps latent viruses from being expressed. So now we're seeing people that got the injection, now they're having expression of Epstein-Barr, papillomas, shingles, HIV, all sorts of things are showing up.
Did you notice that they now have an alert that there's a new outbreak of hepatitis in children that we've never seen before, we don't understand? Well, again, this stuff collects in the liver. It damages your innate immunity in the liver too. I mean, why are we surprised by that? They're not really the people that know about this are not surprised. Just the people that are refusing to look at the sequence of events here and the facts. It's hard not to. They're all these new things are happening to us now. They're coming up with alternative reasons. You know,
Right. they knew this was going to happen because the lipid
Right.
nanoparticle that they put the messenger RNA in, the lipid nanoparticle is designed to look like part of your body. It's encapsulated
Right.
in cholesterol and disteryl phosphatidylcholine, which are normal body fats. So they inject this stuff into you, and it looks like normal part of your body. So it will merge with any cell that it bumps into, and it crosses the blood brain barrier, and it's getting into cells that it should never be able to get into. And then what do these cells do? They start creating the spike protein, the thing that can
Yeah.
kill you. This is not a good idea. Not a good
Right.
idea at all. And this is why this particular procedure should not even be called a vaccine. A vaccine is supposed to have something inside of it that would immediately stimulate your immune system to start making antibodies. This shot doesn't do that. This shot contains lipid nanoparticles that look like self so that it can get into literally any cell it comes in contact with and then start making a protein. That's a drug. This product has a biological effect on your body other than stimulating antibody production. It makes a protein, is what it does. Now, the problem with this protein that it makes is it's totally synthetic because the messenger RNA that they made is actually modified RNA. It's making a protein that your body has never seen before. It's toxic, and it also acts like what's called a prion. Now, a prion has the ability of changing shapes of other proteins that it comes in contact with. And proteins is what you are and who you are. So literally, this shot can change how a person even thinks. And
Right.
unfortunately, the person who got the shot won't be able to detect that. They won't be able to see that they themselves are acting differently. They think they're being just the way they always were. But people like you and me who have elected to not get this injection can clearly see that these people, some of these people that got this injection are not acting the way they were before. It's literally changing them.
Yes, and
Remember
I've heard
House
that from
Flora?
military people, and I've heard,
Yeah.
and there was a famous uh, experiment where they put quail genes into chickens, and the
Okay.
chickens started sounding like quail. They still looked like chickens, but they sounded like quail, and they moved their heads like quail.
Right.
What's that
Yeah.
tell us? And what we're doing is gene therapy on humans. So
Yeah.
we're changing humans, and that's and it
We are.
and presumably it depends how is somewhat dose related. So how many of these injections? Plus, as you know, we can't tell from these injections which one has what. Certain lots
No.
are more deadly, so clearly they're not all the same. We've had pharmacists
No,
tell us they're different colors, they're different viscosities. They're experimenting on the human race, and they're
let's
changing the human race into
let's
transhumans.
talk. Yeah, let's talk about that right now. How this shot is actually mixed and administered into a person's body. This is very critical. If you've ever looked up how this product is to be mixed and administered into a person, it's very, very technical, and it should only be done by a highly trained individual. Now, what did we have happening all across America? We had people literally lined up in cars in church parking lots with their arms hanging out the window, waiting for their sacrament of vaccination to be injected by a poorly trained individual. They are instructed 3 times to actually look at what's in that vial and what's in that syringe before they shove it into you, because it has the capability of coagulating even in the vial or the syringe.
Right.
That's dangerous. So here you can have coagulating goo put directly into your body. And if it gets into a blood vessel or a vein, it is going to almost immediately cause a severe cardiac event like a stroke or a heart attack. And we've seen this happen. We've seen people die. Did you know that half the people that die after this shot, half of them die within 48 hours?
Yeah.
And
I knew.
80% of them die within a week.
You know, I did a
And all
study
of
on
these,
bears early on.
yeah,
I did a study in February of 2021, and I showed that they were bleeding and clotting within and tried to get this published February 2021. Nobody would take the paper because, well, I finally got it in it's in the Journal of Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, but it clearly showed that, and we knew it early on. So the the other thing is anaphylaxis. Now you're talking about they're doing it to people in cars in a parking lot, in a church
right.
parking lot, for example, or or whatever. It's like a drive-through. Now let's just think about this. This has 10 times the rate of anaphylaxis, immediate anaphylaxis, than any other vaccine we've ever had, presumably due to the PEG or whatever it is that they think is in
Polyethylene.
there. But there's multiple things that could do it, but that's the big suspicious one. But here they're letting you drive off in the car. They did actually stop that. They did say, if you're going to do this, you have to wait 15 minutes before you drive away, because they were having automobile accidents. They
Oh,
had to
of
at least
course,
admit that. But we're doing it
of
to
course.
pilots.
Yeah, now we're doing it to pilots, with 200,000-pound pieces of metal hurtling through the atmosphere at 600 miles an hour. Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a question. Do you know how long? So let's say you're a pilot for an airline, for a commercial airline, and you get a vaccine. I don't know in the military what their rule is, but how long after the vaccine are you allowed to fly? Right away?
48 hours is what the
48
rule is.
hours. Right.
You have to wait 48 hours to see if you're having any adverse reaction. And if any adverse reaction happens after that 48 hours, the pilot is to immediately ground himself or herself until the adverse reaction symptoms have gone away. And that's
Well, I
probably
can,
that's probably
I,
not
I,
happening.
right. I can tell you that death and bleeding episodes continue. It's the window that I came up with was the first 4 days, and most of it is within the first 48 hours. But it's really within the first 4 days. After
Yeah.
you get past 4 days, the rate goes way down. But it's really 4 days, not 2 days. So now, how do we explain that the airlines are worried about the altimeter and 5G, but not worried about this? Does that
Yeah,
mean
that's
they have rules? This can't be consummate with FAA flight rules, is it?
it's not consummate with the FAA flight rules. And I looked them up for vaccines, and it says that with a vaccine, the vaccine number one has to be FDA approved. None of these vaccines that any pilot
None.
got are FDA approved. And it does say that for Comirnaty and Spikevax, that the pilot is required to wait for 48 hours to see if any adverse reactions would show up. There are a couple of other vaccines that pilots can get. One of them, I believe, is the typhoid vaccine, and the other is the rabies vaccine. And for those, you have to wait 72 hours. But any of the other vaccines, there is no period of observation. The pilot can get right back into the cockpit and start flying immediately. Now, here's another thing we got to think about. For a pilot to have a drug put into their body, either orally or injected or rubbed into their skin or any other way that you would want to get a drug into their body, it is required by law that there be a period of 12 months after that drug was even approved to see if any aeromedical type adverse reactions could occur. 1 year
Right.
they have to wait after the product was approved. That's
So
so
that's
that they can see
violation.
that's so they can see if any aeromedical type adverse reactions would happen in the general public that might affect the safety of flight for a pilot. I mean, this is a huge deal, and that's for a drug. But this product is not classified as a drug, although it should be, in my opinion, because it's not a vaccine. It doesn't
Right.
act like a vaccine. It doesn't have anything in it that would even attempt to do what a vaccine is supposed to do.
Doesn't stop transmission, number one, which
Now,
is required of a vaccine.
oh, it does. It doesn't stop transmission. It doesn't prevent the illness to begin with, and it's got severe adverse reactions that we're seeing right now.
Now,
And
I have a friend who's a private pilot. He's not commercial, but he's a private pilot and he's flown all his life. And he's worried. I mean, he came to me one time when we were looking at his labs, and I said, "Looks to me like you're hypothyroid, that you need some thyroid medicine and you need to do this." He's afraid of even taking hormones and losing his flight status. So,
That's right.
these guys are afraid to take an aspirin, and yet they're taking this. It's just so bizarre that, and I don't understand. I don't quite understand. It's clear violation of FAA policy. Has the FAA not said anything?
Not yet. They
I know the
haven't they
flight
haven't
surgeons
made,
don't seem to be saying anything in the
no.
military.
And so there's a movement right now among a couple of organizations that have been formed to get the FAA to come forward and make a statement on what's going on here. And this has to be addressed. It has to be addressed before we run into a situation where people are going to get hurt. I
Right.
don't want to see that happen. We cannot
Well,
allow this to happen.
and it's like what I was reading to start this show about Disney. You can live in your own little world that you think is real, but the consequences are going to be the true consequences, not your false reality. And at
Right.
some point, they are going to have to face this. This is it's really it. Disney lost people 50% of their people in one day. I don't want to wait until I'd rather have the airlines figure this out because we all walk away rather than they figure it out because planes start dropping out of the sky. And
Yeah.
speaking of that, I do want to ask this question. Do we know anything about that? While I've got you, this is not necessarily due to the COVID vaccine, although it could be. What about that airline that dropped out of the sky so precipitously in China? Does anybody know anything yet about that? It's interesting they
Nobody knows
haven't talked
anything.
about that.
No, nobody knows anything. We've got to get, the black boxes to see what flight control inputs were put in by the pilot, or if it was a complete mechanical failure. Now, I can surmise what may have happened. If there was literally a crazy pilot in the cockpit, um, if the other pilot got up and left the cockpit to go use the lavatory, that cockpit door can be locked from the inside so that the other pilot cannot regain entry. That's a fact. This can be
Yeah.
done. The pilot can lock the other pilot out. And if that pilot has severe mental problems, then yeah, who knows what they would do up there to injure themselves and everyone else on the aircraft. And this happened before in Switzerland. Do you remember that? Where a young pilot locked the other pilot out and flew the
Yeah.
aircraft into a mountain and killed everyone?
I thought there
This
was
could be,
also one in Japan, a JAL line where the pilot they figured he committed suicide.
yeah, it can happen.
So, and that, the other thing that brings up is I'm kind of shocked what you described about the control mechanisms because obviously if somebody was suicidal and had this electronic panel control that you're discussing
Hmm.
and decided to suddenly put the plane into a sharp nosedive. And this
Yeah.
guy now is going to try and get it out, but he has to wait so many seconds for the override to kick in. That can't be
Well,
good in this situation.
it's
Or is
not
that
it's
not
not a
my
matter. It's actually not a matter of seconds. It's
Oh,
it's
okay.
it's faster than that. But the person has
Oh,
to have the mental capacity to recognize that, yeah, I need to push that button in and hold it. Plus, there are what are called flight laws that are actually built into the flight control system of an aircraft like an Airbus that literally will not allow you to point the nose directly at the ground. It will not allow you to do that, nor will it
so it
allow
makes
you.
you
Yeah,
yeah, it
it
makes
it
you wonder
has
what happened in China then.
well, if it was it a 737, I believe it probably was a
737, 800, I think what they call.
yeah, and I've never flown the 737. It probably not is not a completely fly-by-wire type aircraft. It may have conventional cable controls, which would allow a pilot to point the nose directly at the ground. But even if it was a fly-by-wire aircraft, if the pilot knows how to do it, yeah, you can turn off those computers and put it into what's called direct law, so that all of your flight control inputs will be immediately interpreted by the flight surfaces of the aircraft. And yeah, you can point the nose directly at the ground, but the pilot would
Well,
have to know
that's
how to activate those
I,
systems.
I guess that's a good, that's comforting, but we're still concerned about, again, it's not just heart attacks. We're seeing that's kind of the overt sign that we're seeing with the
Right.
clotting, but we're not seeing the subtle personality changes, the dementia, the
No.
brain cancer, the other things that are going to change the pilots over a period of time that may not be so catastrophically
Yeah,
observable.
exactly. Now, the microclotting that we talked about, that's going to take 2 to 5 years for a chronic illness to show up that could possibly ground a pilot. It takes that long for the microclotting to have an effect, and that's because it causes a condition called ischemia that will ultimately block the proper amount of blood and oxygen that gets to tissue cells and prohibits waste removal. So, these people that got the shot that said, "Oh, I got the shot, nothing bad happened to me." Well, you're
Yeah,
not out of this yet. And then there's
no,
another problem that's called autoimmunity, and that can sometimes take up to 10 years before that
yeah.
rears its ugly head.
Well, and I do remember though Dr. Hoff up in Canada, he was the guy that really found out about the D dimer or started pushing it. He noticed that his people, he's in a village or a small city, small town that has it's on a reservation for the First Peoples in Canada, and he noticed that these people that used to be able to walk 2 miles into his clinic for treatment with no
Right.
problem now couldn't walk a block. And that was just, and the only thing he found was a positive D dimer, and that was within a matter of weeks. So
Exactly.
it's not going to take everybody years. I mean, I think people, again, it's these subtle symptoms that may take a while. Well, we only have another minute to go here. Any last thoughts on what is there anything we can do to wake the airlines up to, I know, other than people stopping the whole vaccine program. I don't know if
If
it's too late for that, but
Yeah, if you got one of these shots, don't ever get another one. It's
right.
causing all problems that has to be clearly evident to everyone right now. We just absolutely have to put the brakes on this thing and end it. The FAA should come out immediately and say no more shots go into any pilots or flight attendants. We're done with it. No more shots go in, and we need to start taking a look at these crew members to see if they have something actively going on in their cardiovascular systems. If they do, they're going to have to be grounded and put on a regimen until that they can prove that they don't have these conditions anymore. Because literally, they're ticking time bombs, they're putting the safety of flight at risk, and that ultimately affects you as a passenger.
Yeah, that's thank you. That's really a good summary, and I appreciate you coming on, and I wish Captain Snow
Yeah,
the best. I texted him, and I know he had his hands full at the time, so I'm glad you could find out what was
he,
going on. But I'm glad he is recovering, and
he is.
our
He
best
may
to him
never
and his
fly again.
family.
He may never fly again because remember, myocarditis is permanent. It
Right.
causes permanent scar tissue in that heart and causes electrical problems in the heart, and that's why his heart stopped. He didn't have any symptoms that this was coming on at all.
Right.
He just collapsed.
It's
He just
electrical. Yeah. And it's unfortunately myocarditis statistically has about a 50% 5-year mortality. So we've got a
that's
lot
what's
of people that are not out of the woods yet. But
no, not
um, hopefully
including children.
hopefully we'll get hopefully we'll get the safety at least resolved right now. We need to do that. So everybody contact the FAA maybe and say something. Thank you for
Yeah,
coming on, and Tamara
it's
will
my
be
pleasure.
back tomorrow, and we appreciate all